Welcome back to Torah on the Go. Whether you are on your Peloton or you're walking your dog or you're sitting in traffic, we are really grateful that you're learning with us right now. I want to welcome back to the podcast my partner in all of this new media mayhem. We're now social media stars.
Mayhem. Yeah.
Mayhem, that's exactly right. People, we can't get to our driveways anymore because there's so many people, paparazzi out there taking pictures of us.
Was that you with Taylor Swift?
That's exactly right. If I was with Taylor Swift, my kids would love it. We're back, and we're back to talk about a little part of the creation narrative, and that is the issue of the snake.
Ah, the snake.
Let's talk about our favorite animal in the Bible. It is the snake. There's snakes and donkeys. Those are basically the two animals that everything happens around, are snakes and donkeys.
Right.
In this instance, in the creation narrative, there are no donkeys.
So it's a crisis. The creation story has a climax, and it's a crisis. And that's what we're going to talk about now. That's what the snake represents, is the crisis. And let me just set a context for it. When you read the first two chapters of Genesis, one of the deep themes of that text is oneness. So you have God creating a world, and according to the tradition, it's like God doesn't use materials. God's just, all the reality of the world is flowing out of God. And so there's a basic oneness between the Creator and God's creation, okay? God creates the human being in one story in the image of God. In the other story, the human being has the breath of God. So there's a oneness between God and the human being. God creates man, and in the first story, man and woman together. And in the second story, man is created first and woman is taken from his side. So there's a oneness, a unity between man and woman. And man is created, the human being is created along with the animals of the world. And so there's a oneness between human beings and nature. In the second story, man is created out of the dust of the earth. There's a oneness between human beings and literally nature. The physicality of the human being is part of nature. This sense of oneness, and the symbol of oneness is the garden. I was wondering, why is it that God puts us in a garden? Why not a palace? Or a shopping center, or a fortress, or a city? Why a garden? Because think about a garden for a minute. If anyone does gardening, gardening is the best expression of the meeting point between nature and human artifice. You let nature do all of this growing, but you make it nice, and you build it in such a way that everything goes together with everything else aesthetically and biologically in a symbiosis. It is the ultimate expression of oneness. And the human being is introduced into this world of oneness. And it's perfect. It's a perfect world, except for one thing. The human being was told, you're a partner in creation. You are given the power of creation. And human beings want to do self-creation. And self-creation means I have to individuate. I have to individuate. Anyone who's ever raised a kid, a 2-year-old, knows this, because what happens around 18 months to 2 years old is the child learns several words. No, or me, or mine. That's individuation. The snake is a symbol of individuation. The snake says to the woman, can't you eat from any tree in the garden? And the woman says, no. Every tree's fine except for that one. That's a forbidden tree. And the snake says, no. The reason it's a forbidden tree is because God doesn't want you knowing what you know, what you could know. And then the Bible says something very, very interesting. It says, she looked at the tree and suddenly realized it was desirable, which is hard to understand, by the way, because it's, how do you look at something and know that it's tasty? And then she understood that tree had power. And she desired the tree. And it's not that the fruit was so luscious. The important part of that sentence is she. She's no longer bonded with her husband. Suddenly she wakes up. She wakes up as a human soul, as a human individual. And it's the individuation of the human being. It's when each of us says, me, what do I want out of life? That's the revolution that breaks the spell of oneness. And that's why we get thrown out of the garden.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. I was sitting at Claremont, my first class, with my advisor, Tammy Schneider, teaching the class. And if you could read Hebrew, you were to bring a Tanakh to class and read in the Hebrew. If you didn't read Hebrew, you had to bring 2 different translations of the Bible and follow along, because you were to understand through this process that anything that was translated was in fact some sort of interpretation.
Right.
It was shocking to me how condemning the English translations were of Eve's decision to eat from the apple.
Yeah.
When in fact, that level of condemnation doesn't exist in the Hebrew text itself.
No, in fact, you could make the case that this is what was intended all along.
You can make
it was a transgressive act, but it's a transgressive act for a higher purpose.
You can understand that what Eve wants is wisdom, is understanding. She wants to open her eyes.
Right.
She actually understands her purpose deep down, and that purpose is actually an understanding of the world around her. Adam's purpose then comes along, and his is a purpose to support her, to be with her.
See, that's the moment of the story, which I think is such a beautiful moment, which we read by much too fast.
We never talk about it.
Right. She's alone with the snake. She makes the choice to eat the fruit. He shows up. He says, honey, what are you doing?
Right.
Here, eat this. Now, he's holding the fruit and it has a bite mark. Now, he has a choice.
That's right.
What's his choice? If he eats, God has told him he will die. If he refuses to eat, she will die, and he will go back to being lonely again. If he eats, he betrays his creator. If he doesn't eat, he betrays his partner.
That's right.
He has to make a choice.
Like every good Jewish husband, since Adam till now, he really doesn't want to betray his wife. He doesn't want to get in trouble with his wife.
He doesn't want to return to the world of loneliness.
His decision is a decision that inspired so many conversations in the Hasidic tradition about what is he deciding in that moment. That moment becomes so crucial in the Hasidic tradition, and we just skim past it in the Torah.
Right.
It's one of the most monumental choices in the Bible itself.
Right.
Is Adam's decision, do I follow Eve or do I follow God's instruction?
Right.
And I would venture to say the purpose of the Bible, the purpose of especially the Jewish perspective, is an understanding that Adam made the right choice.
That's wonderful.
Christian theology points to that moment and says that is a moment of original sin.
Right.
The fall of humanity is the fall of the kingdom out of the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. It would have been a tragedy, a travesty, had we stayed in the garden.
Well, we would be infantilized. We would never have grown out of our infant state to think for ourselves, right? You're raising teenagers, God help you. There are these moments when kids do transgressive acts, and you realize, I got to let him get away with it because he's expressing himself. She's expressing herself in this. This is the beginning of the growth of what the psychologists call ego strength. Right? Expressing who I am in the world. And you got to let that happen.
That's right. So baggy pants, purple hair, all of that stuff. That all goes right back to the Garden of Eden.
Rabbi Lebovitz endorses those choices. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure. My generation had different ways of expressing itself.
So it is, for me at least, every time we get to that story, that setting, I think to myself, we don't spend enough time sitting and reflecting as a tradition on the profound nature of that moment. Of that moment.
And then the next moment, of course, is just as astonishing. God, says the Torah, is taking a walk, a jog in the garden. Right. Now, it's Friday afternoon of week 1. And God just created this whole world, and it's so wonderful. So he puts on his UCLA sweatshirt, and he's or SC, I'm sorry, probably UCLA, and he's jogging through the garden, and he comes across these 2 kids hiding. And he says, the first thing he says to them, the first question in the whole Bible is, Ayeka. where are you? And it's just that moment of, first of all, that God is so human about this.
Right.
And ayeka, that's the question that the whole rest of the scripture, the whole rest of the religion comes to answer. What are you doing with the gifts of life?
Right. The simple way of reading that, I would say the silly way of reading that is that God doesn't know where they are in the garden. They're hiding behind a bush and God can't see them. I think the meaningful way of reading it is that God knows that they stand in a very different place than they did even just a moment ago.
Absolutely.
They've made a choice to separate away from an instruction manual and begin a process of exploration and innovation and, most importantly, love.
Self-creation.
Self-creation.
Right.
And once that happens, once they decide to sever away from the instruction manual and take the responsibility of the world on the shoulders for their own purposes, that in fact is the beginning of the rest of the Hebrew Bible.
Right. Right. And then what happens is he says to them, what'd you do? And you so want Adam to stand up straight and confess, but instead it's unfortunately the birth of a character that we like to call man as wuss, because he says, oh, it wasn't my fault, it was the woman you gave me. And then she does the same thing, she blames the snake. And then there comes a series of, well, I guess in certain theologies it's seen as punishments. I don't see it as punishments. These are the consequences of individuation, right? What are the consequences of individuation? You're now separated from nature. You're going to have to struggle with nature to make a living. You're now separated from your own body, in which case you now know mortality. The most brutal moment of loneliness is the moment of death, right? Women, he says, are going to struggle with children because, the idea is that she'll have trouble giving birth, which of course is very true physically, but that's a symbol of something. It's every parent's struggle to let the kid become who the kid is meant to be and to let go of the child and allow the child the same process of self-creation. And humanity will be alienated from nature. There will be an animosity between the two. And it's the sadness. There is a sadness at that point because it means that we're not what we were, but now we have a whole different task ahead of us. The task of how do you live as an individuated human being outside of the Garden of Eden and still live a life of meaning and holiness.
We all stand in that moment many times in our lives,
All the time.
more times than we like to admit,
Right.
where the snake, and I encourage you not to think of an actual real snake in this instance. I encourage you to think of a Yetzer Hara, this Hasidic understanding that all of us are filled with a good inclination and an evil inclination.
Right.
All of us have this evil inclination to make the wrong choice.
The impulse, right?
The impulse. But according to the Hasidic tradition, the impulse is actually not an evil impulse. It's not Yetzer Hara in the sense that it's evil. It's productive. It's practical. It's the non-ideal. It's the non-ideal energy. That's exactly right. The non-ideal energy. And that non-ideal energy, they explain, is the reason why we go to work, why we get married,
Right.
why we build houses, why we have children. Right. Because if someone ever sat us down and said, becoming a parent means that you're going to have all this tsuris in your life, let me explain to you all the tsuris, we might not choose it. We might not choose it. And that would be a tremendous loss for humanity and the creation process. And so what the creation story is trying to explain is that sometimes the best decisions actually are a result of a process where we actually encounter the Yetzer Hara, where the practical impulse in our life to make a choice, to separate away from the instruction manual and make a choice on our own is actually something that we should own because that's who we are.
Yeah. There's a beautiful Talmudic story, as you will know, that the rabbis used their magical powers to capture the Yetzer Hara, put it in jail. And it says, the next day, nobody built a house,
Right.
No one started a business, no one got married, and there wasn't a fresh egg to be had in all of Israel.
Right.
It's such a beautiful image.
Right. The world would collapse if there was no snake. And that acknowledgement that we need both sides in this world,
Right.
That's part of the profound nature of that story.
So here's the end of the story, which I just so love. So God says you got to leave the garden. And of course, then God makes them close. This is my mother used to say, leave the house. I don't want to see you again. Put on a sweater, right? And then God sends them out to the world. And here's what's wonderful. He doesn't destroy the garden.
No.
If he didn't want us getting back into the garden, why not destroy it? Instead, he puts an angel in front of it with a turning sword.
A spinning sword and fire. It's the greatest special effect. People focus on the splitting of the sea in Charlton Heston.
This is better.
But this is better.
Right.
This is better. That somewhere there's a doorway to the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And only Adam, Eve, and Led Zeppelin knows where the stairway is.
Well, but I want to go further. I think it's more than that. You see, so let's take an experiment. Let's walk down Ventura Boulevard and let's get to the corner of Ventura Boulevard and Eden Avenue and turn right. And there at the end of Eden Avenue is the gate to the garden, which means we can see into a world of oneness, a world of immortality, a world where there's no death, a world where there's no need, there's no want, there's no brokenness. We can see it, we just can't get there. Wait, it gets even better. There's an angel with a turning sword, right? And the sword's on fire, right? But right behind that angel is the tree of life, the tree of immortality. Now, if you superimpose those two images, the flame of the sword and the tree behind it, it sort of maybe looks a little bit like a tree that's on fire.
Like a burning bush,
but
perhaps.
It doesn't burn up.
Right.
Where do I know that from?
Right.
That's the symbol that invites Moses into his job to redeem the people Israel from slavery. And then wait, it gets better. Moses takes us out of slavery in Egypt. We cross the Sinai Desert. We get to Mount Sinai. We get a bunch of laws and instructions. We'll talk about that later. We get one particular instruction. I want you to build a mishkan, a dwelling place for God. And in front of it, I want you to build a menorah, a 7-branch candelabrum decorated with leaves and fruits and nuts. Now, if you build a candelabrum and you decorate it with leaves and flowers and fruits and nuts, it's sort of going to look like a tree. And when you light it, it's a tree that's burning but never burns up. That's the tree of the garden. And that, not the 6-pointed star, becomes the perennial symbol of the Jewish people. That's what you find in the Roman sarcophagi of Jews who were buried underneath the city of Rome in the 1st century. That's what you find in medieval manuscripts that were Jewish books. That's what you find over the door of the oldest synagogue in the world, the Alta Neue Shul in Prague. That's what you find across the street from the Knesset. Right. The menorah, the tree of life, burning but never burning up, the garden with its oneness is in fact the perennial symbol of the Jewish people. And one more point, then I'll be finished. What do we know that's called Eitz Chaim, tree of life? Right. There's one more thing in the world that we call tree of life, which is, of course,
the Torah.
The Torah itself. Because the Torah itself is the key to how you get back into the garden, how you enjoy a world of oneness, even a glimpse of immortality as an individuated human being. That's what the whole book is about.
So I was in this class in Claremont, surrounded by other non-Jewish classmates, and occasionally they would look at me and say, "Do all Jews believe this, Rabbi, or is this just you?" All Jews believe that the snake, that this isn't original sin, that humanity, the kingdom of didn't fall in that moment.
Right.
And I would say to them, "I'll do an experiment with you right now."
Yeah.
Okay, because the professor was Jewish and the receptionist sitting outside was Jewish. I said, "Here we go. Eitz Chaim hi." That's exactly what happened. They all answered. All the Jews in the room answered. And in the hallway, they answered, Lama chazikim ba.
It's a tree of life to those who hold to it, and all of its ways are pleasant is the song we sing
when we return the Torah to the ark.
When we hold up the Torah and return it to the ark.
And Jews say that piece of liturgy and don't understand how deeply meaningful it is in the way that we steer our life in terms of a compass. And we steer it away from the garden, perhaps, or we steer it in acknowledgement that the leaving the garden was not the downfall of humanity, but it was, in fact, the birth of humanity.
Right. And how do you make the world into the garden?
How do we make the world now into the garden? That's the question for us that we're going to begin talking about next time when we see you. We hope that you send us questions for us to address next time. It's been 4 weeks and we've worn the same clothes, so we're going to change our outfits and come back next time refreshed and ready to go. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Torah on the Go, and we look forward to learning with you next time.
Thanks for being with us.